Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Keeping Up with Keith series. Today, I have an amazing guest. This journalist, is just amazing. A social creator, a world changer who always wants to slay. Today we are keeping up with Tre'vell Anderson. Hello, Tre'vell.
Hello, Keith. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yes, I am so excited to have you. You have been a fixture in my career. Gosh, I'll say maybe more than 10 years.
Wow.
Meeting you through,
We are old.
NABJ.
We are
Yes,
old. Yes. We were kids
you
back then, you know.
yes. But you have really left your stamp and mark and inspired so many journalists and people with your advocacy, especially within NABJ, for younger people, for LGBTQ plus journalists in the community, and now trans journalists as well. You being executive director of the Trans Journalists Association, so you have really having a huge impact on people in this field because it's very important. But I want to talk about you. How'd you get your start? I know you're from South Carolina. You went to
Mhm.
Morehouse, and then
Mhm.
stopped to write at the LA Times, and now yeah. So how did that
Mhm.
all start? The first part of your career.
First part of my career. So yes, as you mentioned, I went to Morehouse and then I went while I was at Morehouse, my senior year, I was managing editor of our school newspaper, the Maroon Tiger. And at that point in time, I had changed my major like 12 million times, as many of us do. But the most consistent thing since high school at that point was journalism. And so even though I studied sociology, I was like, oh, I want to be a journalist. And I decided to go to grad school. So I went to grad school. I got my master's in journalism, master's in communication, with a focus in journalism from Stanford University. And while I was in that program, it was a 1 year program. It had the opportunity to meet this lady who was over the internship and fellowship program at the Los Angeles Times. And though I did not want to work at a newspaper at the time because I was like, who wants to work at a newspaper? Newspapers are dying. Do you remember when we used to say that? I ended up applying to this diversity fellowship program that they had at the time, and I got it. And so, what ended up happening for me, I graduated from Stanford. I spent a summer in New York interning for Logo TV, which used to be the gay cable channel. I don't know if people remember that. And then they also had a editorial website called newnow.next.com. And so I interned for both of those entities for that summer, moved to Los Angeles to start at the LA Times that September. And the rest was history. You know, the fellowship program was quite an interesting journey just because it we would discover years later when myself and a number of others began the process of getting the LA Times to unionize, we would find out after unionizing that this diversity fellowship program was the primary way that the newsroom became diverse over the many decades that the program was in play, which is to say if you were a person of color primarily and you did not come through the diversity program, you were lucky because that just wasn't the way that we got in. And so that experience was a really interesting one overall that we can go deeper into if you would like. But that really set me off in terms of my career and figuring out, my way in this industry.
Okay, wow, okay. And during this time, were you, fully out of your authentic self, or was it a process?
It was a process. I was definitely gay and femme presenting at the time. I had not found a home in the language of transness or non-binariness at the time. But I remember in my how they send like bios out to the newsroom of the fellows and interns when we come
Yeah.
in. I remember putting in my bio that I was the love child of Melissa Harris Perry, RuPaul, and Wendy Williams. So like I was out, and I was a version of myself, and a version of myself that was, very much the only kind of me, specifically in that newsroom at the time, by which I mean specific. I wasn't the only Black person, or even the only Black queer person. But I definitely, I was definitely gender bending and gender non-conforming in my presentation at the time. And so that definitely, I think, factored into some of my experiences as well.
Gotcha. And so then let's, talk about your experience within NABJ because you decided to take up a leadership role being
Hmm.
region 4 director. For people who don't know, there's many regions for NABJ. The region 4 does mostly the West Coast. NABJ chapters, which stands for the National Association of Black Journalists, for people who don't know who that is, don't know what that is. And so why did you want to serve NABJ? What inspired you to do that?
So while I was at the LA Times, the vice president of the LA chapter at the time, her name was Ann Simmons. She's a fabulous internationally based journalist now. She's running somebody's international bureau, one of those newspapers, international bureau right now. But she was vice president of the local chapter at the time. And she went around the newsroom to every single Black person and said, you need to be at the NABJLA meeting this weekend. I actually went, and I ended up finding a community, and wanting to invest in our local chapter first and foremost. And so I eventually became president of the local chapter. And it is in being president of the local chapter that I had to deal with the national organization a lot more. And to be quite frank, I was like, y'all need no help up in here. Okay, this organization could be so much more for so much more of us, right? And I felt like I could do that. But I always say that my villain origin story within NABJ started my one of my early meetings at the local chapter. This was after my first time going to the national conference, which was in DC that year. I believe it was the first joint conference between NABJ and NAHJ, the
Mhm.
Hispanic Journalists Organization. And
Yes.
I just didn't feel welcome, just to be quite frank. I just didn't feel welcomed. Like I said, I was very gender nonconforming. I wore heels. I was very femme presenting, and it was clear to me that that wasn't cool in this space. That wasn't welcome. And when we returned to LA and we're reflecting on the national convention, one of the board members of the national organization at the time had Skyped in. It was actually Skype, so that gives you a time period window. Skyped into the meeting,
Mhm.
and was taking feedback, and I shared my feedback about how I didn't feel welcomed, and for the various different reasons. And he told me, he was like, "Well, if you feel like something was off or something was not good, then you need to get involved to change it." Now that's a kind of directive and personality that actually chases a lot of people away, right? It was actually very, very a negative experience for me, but I like to run toward challenges. And so from that moment, I was like, "Oh, if I want to change this space, I have to get involved." And so I started with the local chapter, and we were great, and we were amazing. And then I ran to be Region 4 director for the national board, as you mentioned, largely because I felt like the person who was in the role before me didn't do a good job of articulating my perspective and my chapter's needs to the national organization.
Mhm.
And that began, the journey, and it doing what we can to make this space better, safer, more welcoming for, the Black LGBTQ folks who are already there, right? Who we know are already in the mix. But often don't have that professional community safe space, right, where they can be affirmed in this career and in this industry.
Mhm. And during your time in leadership and just with NABJ, what has been, I guess, a experience that you look back on that was positive that you affected that change, or people have come up to you, your colleagues or people
Mhm.
who looked up to you, like, what legacy, the legacy that you left?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. So I have like things that mean the most to me just as a
Mhm,
matter of historical record within the organization. And so, for example, a number of years ago, I while I was on the board, I authored an oral history of the LGBTQ task force within NABJ, which is a very sordid and complex history of how Black folks, right, can other and marginalize other Black folks. And it was important to me to be able to do that and have that on, organizational letterhead, so to speak, so that it's out there and so that folks know the people who made even the work that I'm trying to do possible, right? And so being able to do that, being able to interview people about the first and only openly gay president of NABJ from the 90s, Tom Morgan, who was an editor at the New York Times at the time, to learn about that history and archive it in a particular way and space, and to also bring in some of the newer history and the connections there. And so that was and is something that's very important to me. But really, when I think about the legacy, the thing that comes to mind is the LGBTQ task force reception that we have every year. Since before I joined the national board, I was co-chair and then chair of the LGBTQ plus task force. And under my leadership, we rebuilt this space and this community so that when, the first year I was task force chair, we had, say, 25 people show up to the reception, right? To now, the latest LGBTQ task force is well over 100 motherfuckers up in this thing, Not all LGBTQ per se, but definitely folks who find a safety and a community, right, within the bounds of the walls, right, that we're able to create as a community. And that has been important and enriching, right, to me, to where now, you'll be at convention, we'll see all kinds of young baby gays, baby trans people in their fullness, right,
mhm.
moving through NABJ feeling comfortable. And it's because of folks, us old heads now, right, who were doing it when they first came to the convention. You know what I mean? Or they seen us talking about NABJ online and they're like, oh, this might be, a safe space for us. And so that's always something special for me every year.
That's great, great, and I'm assuming you're going to the convention this year?
Yes, I will be in ATL, okay?
Okay, okay, so I know people are talking about it, so
Are you going to be there, Key?
unfortunately, no.
You said I'm done. You said I've hung up my NABJ hat. Heard.
Well, no,
Heard.
I spent money on concerts and cruise for myself.
Here, you said I'm treating myself this year. I love that.
Yes, I'm going to Ariana this weekend.
Period.
Then I'm going to Olivia Jean next month.
You're doing it up.
Uh, yes, then a cruise down. I'm taking a Virgin Voyage cruise down to Mexico, so for my birthday. So
Listen, I need to get on your tip, okay? Listen,
yeah,
this is take a little vacation.
yes, yes. I highly recommend the cruise line. Virgin Voyage is really good.
I've
That's
never
my
done a
point.
cruise, so we'll see.
Okay, okay. Well, no, they're very LGBTQ friendly. It's very inclusive there.
I
So
love
I
that.
highly
Okay.
recommend it. Okay, so also I want to talk about just your journalism career because you
Hmm.
have written for Time Magazine, Essence. You have been an editor at a large at another magazine, and you also freelance. So what is that grind like? Because I felt like you were hopping from
Hmm.
many jobs to jobs, and so as a
Yeah.
working journalist, what was that like? What were you most proud of? And what is something you wished you learned when you really got into it?
Something I wish I learned. Okay. So yes, I after I spent 4 years at the Los Angeles Times in total. I left the Los Angeles Times and then I went to Out Magazine to be their director of culture and entertainment, and, I was in that job for a little under a year and then I was laid off 2 days before Christmas 2019. That is what forced me into freelancing, and while I can now look back on freelancing as an opportunity to grow my wings and my reach, right, in terms of where my words have since gone and my career has gone. It was not easy, you know? It was not easy because it is freelancing is, a kind of grind, a kind of hustle that can easily lead to burnout, and so I was blessed enough, though, throughout that to be able to spin it, enough into a career where, like you mentioned, I've been published a variety of different places, cover stories and feature stories and whatnot. I'm super grateful. I've written a couple books as a result of being,
Mhm.
out in the world. Have hosted a number of podcasts as well. And so like the career has definitely taken many shifts and turns. I think one of the things that I wish I knew going into at least the freelance side of the things is that like, it actually requires you to be a little nimble. It actually requires you to be flexible. A lot of the work that I'm doing, most of the work that I'm doing today, I didn't even consider that I would be doing, back in 2019 when them people laid me off. The audio stuff, it is so many things that I did not know was possible because I was buying into a very rigid idea of what, being a journalist meant, right? Not realizing that I naturally brushed up against all of those traditional conceptions. And so once I was able to settle into the fact that I am who I am and it shows up in my work, it allowed me to be more receptive to what the universe brought my way in terms
Mhm.
of my career, whether or not the specific thing looked like everybody else's understanding of journalism or reporting.
It's complicated
Yeah,
because you've gotta pay the bills.
yes, you do.
And yes, so what advice would you give to just a journal like, I want to do this authentically, but I know how things are being, especially what's been going on in the media, other news organizations, how they cover, especially
Mhm,
gay or trans issues are
mhm.
a little bit skewed in a sense,
Sure,
or
sure.
it doesn't tell the or I feel like we're just not getting the whole story. Yes.
Mhm.
So what advice would you give to them?
So my disclaimer with this advice is, and any advice that I give to the young folks is that, I absolutely played the game at the earlier part of my career. Played a game, at the earlier part of my career. Because I played a game at the earlier part of my career, it set me up in a way to be able to not play said games at this point in my career. And so I think for young folks, it is up to you all to decide the kinds of journalists and careers and jobs, because they're all different, that you want to be and have in this moment. And no matter which decision you choose, there will be a host of resulting responses and actions as a result of that you just have to deal with, right? So if you wanna replicate if you want to replicate the kind of freedom and authenticity that you see show up in my work at this stage of my career, in your work at your stage of your career, it could very well lead to a lack of opportunity. It could very well lead to pigeonholing. It could very well lead to you only being called for certain kinds of things. You see what I'm saying? or
Mhm.
it could lead to you having no job and being stuck as a freelancer because the work that I do, respectfully, the work that I do as an alternate entertainment and culture journalist and film critic and as a what they call it soft news person, those are the positions that get obliterated first in newsrooms. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So it there are a number of realities that we're going to have to navigate regardless. And so what do you want and what are you willing to do to get there and be that? I don't know if that makes sense, but I really just think that I try not to sugarcoat things for the younger folks. You know what I mean? Because I also think that they don't want sugarcoated anything, right?
Yeah.
Because it's wild times out there.
Mhm, mhm.
It's a
Yes.
wild time to be a journalist. It's a wild time to be a Black person. It's a wild time to be an LGBTQ person and trans, especially. Don't be at the intersection of those things, right? And those of us who are in media, are navigating an added level of surveillance and pressure and responsibility. That is our truth and our reality. And also, the kind of commitment I've made to this work is one that persists right beyond this moment. And so what does it look like for us to hold on in the midst of this in hopes and in pursuit of what's going to come after and what's going to come next?
Mhm. No, exactly, exactly. I mean, it's the same advice for me, because I feel like I had to play the game when I first started. Like, for me,
No
I just
it
like
is no shade.
yes, I feel like I created like I have to be the model Black employee because it's usually I'm one of few Black producers and male. Most
Hmm.
of the producers are Black female in the industry. So for me, I'm the representation.
Hmm.
So I feel
Literally.
like yes, yeah. So I felt like I had to be, just not combative, just do my
Hmm.
stuff, do my work, and go home.
Hmm.
Say yes to everything. And
Hmm.
then when I got to San Diego, that's when I got to be my true authentic self because I felt confident about my job. Like I just felt like I can do this,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
and all this. And I felt like, I became more happier and I loved it. And so, it's a journey, it's a process, but pick and choose your battles.
No shade. Pick and choose your battles and the reality is I'm never going to shame someone for this is what I say. I'm never going to shame someone for, making the decisions that they feel like are most important for their survival at that particular time. And so if you feel like you got to go into these people corporate newsrooms and you got to delete all your social media and you need to, toe the line, do it. Is how I feel. If that's the opportunity that presents itself to you, it gets you in the door and on a path that you want. Yeah. Do it. Now I hope you come back to the promised land once you get there, once you get a little footing. I hope you get to come back to the promised land. But it is a journey for all of us, no matter the industry you're in, right? Around, authenticity and what it looks like and what it means to be able to bring our full selves to our work.
Exactly, exactly. And I want to talk about bringing your full self to work. I mean, the work that you're
Mhm,
doing right now as executive director of the Trans Journalists Association. So, can you tell me what does that role entail, and what has
mhm.
been some challenges that trans journalists are facing now, and where are some improvements or progress that you're seeing that's happening?
For sure. So the Trans Journalists Association is similar to NABJ or NAHJ, a journalism support organization. For us, we are fostering the careers of trans and gender expansive journalists. And then we're also resourcing the broader industry with tools to improve coverage of trans rights and communities, particularly at a time where we know there's rampant misinformation and a host of politicized discourse, right? That is populating mainstream coverage and representations of the community. And so we do newsroom trainings. We have a style book and coverage guide that is available on our website. We do monthly trainings for our members, etc. We are doing what we can to intercede in this moment in which both, as I mentioned before, journalists and press freedom is under attack, right? And also, there is a coordinated effort to attempt to erase trans people, especially from public life. And so when you talk about the kinds of unique challenges that trans journalists are facing, the most immediate thing that comes to mind are, we have members, we have almost 650 members across the globe, primarily here in the United States. We have members in just about every state. What that means is we have members, we have journalists, right, who are living in states where they're not allowed to go to the bathrooms that align with their identities in public, right? And so they're having to cover the city council meeting, right? And hold their bladder for however long a city council meeting is. You know what I mean? That is something that it's important for me to connect to. That's a press freedom issue, right? The fact that a journalist cannot use the public accommodations, right, appropriately to be able to do their job, right? That's preventing the public from getting the appropriate information about what's happening in that room. That's a press freedom issue, but we don't think of it like that. Right? We don't see access to bathrooms part of the press freedom statements that all of the organizations are putting out there. Additional unique challenges for trans journalists are, we are, when we talk about how many jobs have been lost in journalism, trans people were never even in the newsroom to be able to lose the jobs, right? I can count on one hand the number of openly trans people on a masthead or editor level position in US mainstream newsrooms. That's a problem, particularly at a moment where our community is receiving outsized attention, right, from the political establishment, especially, right? And so a lot of the work that we're doing is trying to, like I said, resource the broader industry with tools and coverage guidance to improve coverage of our communities, and then also equipping trans journalists in the ways that we need to be able to weather the mainstream news storm, or as we're finding more and more, folks developing and starting their own independent, news outlets, right, that are expressly trans, forward or centric and justice minded. And so it really, the work really runs the gamut. I've been in this role a little over a year now, and we're continuing to grow because the need in the moment continues to grow. And so, yeah, that's the Trans Journalists Association.
Okay, okay, no, that's good. I learned something today about them, so thank you so much. I appreciate it. And no, the work that you're doing is very important. So thank you. I mean, slay on, continue.
Okay, period.
Yes. So I know you have your pulse on the culture. I mean, look, you've got historically Black phrases. You have the Seated
Mm-hmm.
Show with Ray. I mean, you even wrote your own book. Gosh, we see each other. So
Mm-hmm.
you know, like you have your pulse on culture. And now in today's age, there has been a lot of think pieces about Black culture,
Mm-hmm.
LGBT culture too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
especially have what has hit the zeitgeist of the HR heated rivalry or Black culture in
Mm-hmm.
regards with is God is or
Mm-hmm.
I love boosters and just Hollywood. It feels like people that they're rolling. I feel like they're not hiring Black people or any person of color for anything.
Okay.
You know, anything's getting
Okay.
that's being greenlit.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is your pulse on the culture right now?
You know, but what's the saying that we used to say that, the more times change, the more things stay the same? That's my pulse on the culture right now because you're absolutely right. even though we have these kind of highlights of the moment, like an Is God Is or like an I Love Boosters, it really, those things were greenlit a couple years ago. You know what I mean? And now we're getting them. I do think that both of those films in particular coming out at a time like this is an offering for us as a culture because I find both of those films very challenging. That's not to say they're not good. I think both films are great, but they both have concepts behind them that I think are challenging if we sit down and think a little deeper than just what we see on screen. And so yeah, we are in this interesting moment, particularly with Juneteenth coming up
Yeah.
in Pride Month
Mhm.
where, those of us at the intersection of these communities that are also dealing with so much right now. I'm thinking about them people trying to give reparations to the January 6th rioters as opposed to the descendants of enslaved black people in this country. And I'm thinking of them
Mhm.
the Voting Rights Act stuff that
Mhm.
the Supreme Court. There's just so much. There's so much
Yes.
happening to our communities of historically excluded people. And so what I find encouraging of this moment though is that we are finding joy and fun in the midst of the foolishness, right? I think that's the beauty of like black resilience is that despite what's all going on, we're still going to dance and laugh and sing and carry on. Even the fact that you talking about going to these concerts, right? I think it's quite important that many of us are refusing to stop living our life, right? We are refusing to disappear or go back in the closet or I'm thinking about the people don't want trans people to have, IDs and passports that
Mhm.
accurately reflect our identities. They wanna do so much, and yet we are finding ways to like smile. And that's motivating for me. That's encouraging for me, and it is something that keeps me going. Just being able to be like, yeah, well, things are not great right now, but we can still have fun, along the way, and our joy can be part of what it looks like to resist, in this moment. I don't
Yes,
know if I
yes.
answered
No,
the question there, but
no,
the
no, no,
Lord put
no,
that on
no.
my spirit.
Yes, yes, no, joy is it's important to have joy. And before we wrap this up, I asked this question of everybody, what are people keeping up on? So, Travell, what are you keeping up on?
What am I keeping up on? You know, I am keeping up on uh my latest favorite TV show, which is I love game shows, Keith.
Mhm.
Okay. So I be watching all the game shows, okay? From Jeopardy to the four, not the four, what's that thing? The floor, that's what it's called.
Well,
To my latest favorite, which is Password with Kiki Palmer.
yeah.
As the host, I love Kiki Palmer, the game show host character. And I've just found myself, I've rewatched old seasons, of the game show. It's that's what I'm keeping up with because that's where I'm finding my joy. Okay, and my smiles in this moment.
Okay, lovely. And anything else you wanna add, and where can people find you on social media?
Yes. Anything else I want to add? Well, you mentioned both of my books. We took one of the books, Historically Black Phrases, and we turned it into a live game show called Historically Black Phrases Live that we tour around. Our next show is, I don't know when this comes out, but our next show is June 18th in Boston. But the thing I want to highlight is in September, we have a card game based on the live game show and the book that is coming out called Watch a Mouth. And so I think folks should be interested in that. And if you want more information, you can find that online at historicallyblackphrases.com. And then I'm on the socials at Rayjon, Rayzhon. Thanks for having me, P.
Yes, no, thank you for having me. I cannot wait for that. Oh gosh. Wow. Okay.
Uh-huh. We gonna get you. We gonna get you one. We gonna it's super fun. We wrote it ourselves.
Uh-huh.
It's really cute.
Okay, got oh gosh, you should partner with, I believe there's a board game shop opening up in Leimert Park or somewhere in South LA that I saw on TikTok recently. Like, it's supposed to be, like, all
Okay.
black board games and all that stuff, so I
That's
can't remember the name,
interesting.
but I saw it and I
Okay,
just
well, you gonna
looked.
if you see it again, send it to me, text it to me.
Yes, I will send it to you. Okay, awesome, Tre'vell, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. And for
Thank you.
everyone, yes, absolutely. And you can follow me on all my platforms on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Keeping Up with Keith. Again, happy Pride Month, everybody. Happy Juneteenth. Happy Black Music Month. And
Okay.
have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.